I'm going to ask a question that I think a lot of people have been thinking about. Oh, well, I've gotten a lot of requests for this. So while I don't know how to lead into this. What do you think?
Just do it.
What do you think of Melania's speech at the Republican National Convention this year?
Oh, this is so good.
How can the similarities between her speech and Michelle Obama's 2008 DNC speech be justified? Like, what can you make of that fiasco?
Okay. So this is good. People asked for this? This is a good question. Let's talk more about Melania. So, because I actually have an interesting read on Melania, but I haven't been asked that, so I won't share it yet. So here's the thing about Melania. I see someone in the back just went, what? I want to hear it. Come see me, I'll tell you. So my feeling about the Melania speech, so I happen to be in the unenviable position of actually having been worked at the Republican National Convention. So the Republican National Convention is set up by an entity called the Committee on Arrangements. And the Committee on Arrangements is like, they set that up long before the primaries even start and the candidates are selected, because in order to build something that's second only in size to the Olympics, you need to get started kind of early. So the Committee on Arrangements, well, partisan in the sense that the Republican National Committee sets it up and stands it up to do the convention. It has no preference among the primary nominees. So in 2008, I was the senior writer for the Republican National Convention Committee on Arrangements. And essentially what we do is we pave the way for the eventual nominee. So most of what we do leading up is we make sure that, the stage is built. We make sure that somebody remembered to reserve the stadium. We, all of those kind of things that you tick off. And then also we message general things about the convention, about what's going to be happening there. And as you get closer, and once a nominee is selected, you then meet with the campaign of the nominee, and you begin to brand what you have done with their messaging, right? So how would you like your biography to be, explained? How would you like, what policies would you like us to focus on? How do you want to program it out? What should be the message of the day? And when we get to that stage, my job is largely to make sure that the several thousand people who have come to the convention identified as being willing to be media surrogates. So this is everybody from like a state party chair or a delegate to the convention all the way up to a former president, has the materials that they need to go on television, radio, podcasts, whatever, about the nominee, about the convention, about the agenda, about the policies. So I signed on to do that for the 2012 convention, long before I knew who the nominee was going to be. And you can imagine when Donald Trump was chosen, and now it's my job to explain like how we're going to build the wall. I was like, no, just no, because they haven't explained that. They have no language to explain any of that. And their language, I'm not going to repeat. And I'm not sending that out to surrogates. And so I went through this very difficult period where it was like, am I actually going to go and do this job, or am I not going to go and do this job? And ultimately, I weighed in on the side of, I'm going to go. Part of it was that there was a very real effort to replace Trump at the convention. And I thought people need to be on the ground. Like, there were so many people just abandoning the convention. And I thought, first of all, in the event that that happens, there needs to be good communicators on the ground, because this is going to be a total chaotic event. Second thing was, I felt like I could do good work in the sense that I could go and I could find out what was really there for the messaging and what policies they actually had. And I could make sure, because I'm responsible for the surrogates, that all these rising stars who actually are good people and their hearts are in the right place, that they don't wind up getting on TV and getting in situations where they can't explain things. But the pact that I made, and that all of the writers who came and worked for me made, was we were not going to invent things. We were not going to make Donald Trump look better than he was. So that got tough, because there were some days where they had like an issue agenda and they had no language, and we're all talented writers, and I can write you a conservative position on that, and I can explain, I know how to do that, I know enough about the policy, but the rule in the room was we don't make things up, we don't write things that aren't there. And then Melania. So I knew, it's now been public knowledge, that Matthew Scully and John McConnell had, much in the same vein that my writers had showed up, which was, at that point we were still kind of like, maybe we can help. Maybe this isn't as bad. People were still talking about the pivot. I think we're still waiting for the pivot, but it's never coming, spoiler alert. But everyone was talking about the pivot, like maybe he'll be different as the nominee. And I think everybody was kind of all hands on deck. Like if that can happen, like I want to be helpful because that's better for the country to have one of the two major nominees actually being out there making, having him make the pivot was better than him not. So I knew that Matthew and John had written a draft for Melania. And I am one of, I think, 5 people in the world who have heard that draft. And that draft was awesome. And it was so good, and it was funny, and it was, all wonderful things. And they had talked with the team there. It was a very, very good speech. And so I thought in the back of my mind, I'm not involved in speech writing at all for the Trump campaign. I'm just there to do talking points for surrogates. And I thought to myself, well, and then the convention started and I was not thrilled. I actually made a pact that I was not going to go into the convention hall at all because we were in another building. We were in a skybox in the baseball field, which tells you, and you may be saying to yourself, but I thought the convention was held in a basketball arena, and you would be right. Because that's what they think of writers a lot of the time. They're like, oh, just put them way far away. Just put them way far away. And so we were happy as clams. We were like, all right, we're not going to the convention floor. We're just going to sit in the skybox, write what we can. We're not making anything up, and then we're packing up our laptops and we're leaving. And so I had made this pact. I was not going into the convention hall. I'm just watching it from a television in the skybox, like across the street. And I started to watch some of the speeches, and we saw some of the speeches come through, and I was very concerned about a lot of the messaging in them. And we flagged some things. There was some stuff where we actually, even though it wasn't our job, sent it back and we're like, you just FYI, heads up, like you can't say this and we won't reprint this for surrogates, like unacceptable. But I'm eagerly awaiting Melania's speech because I know she's going to knock it out of the park because I'm one of 5 people who've actually seen and heard that. And I have heard Matthew Scully, he would be horrified that I said this, but Matthew Scully do this dramatic like reading of the draft, and I'm like, it's so good. And then she gets up, and that is not the speech she gives. She gives this entirely different speech, which, if I may say, was not as good as the speech that I had heard. And I'm like, what? Where did your speech go? And so, because I knew that they were editing with her, but I thought that had been fruitful. And as it turns out, I don't know what happened to their draft, but I do know that they then relied on this family friend who does not have a speech writing background. I believe she's a former ballerina who does some writing. That's, not to knock her. That's great. But she just doesn't have any experience in writing at this level. And if I had to guess, this is what I think happened. When you go through and you do your research process, you go through and you look at all of the previous similar speeches, right? So she probably went back and she watched and she got transcripts of Michelle Obama, Laura Bush, right? Hillary Clinton. You go back and you watch all of them. And what she probably did was she had a document open and she wrote lines that she found compelling, not thinking I'm going to use that line, but thinking, oh, that was like a really artful way to do that. I wonder if I could do something similar, right? If I could make a similar pivot, or right? We all do this, but what I would do is I would keep my research doc and my draft separate, so that because it's so easy. You start getting into it. It's 3:00 in the morning. And all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, I wrote that, but you didn't write. And that was good. And it's like, no, it's good, but you didn't write it. And so you can get confused. It's just exhaustion. And then the draft is being passed from